Okay, the next question is about water and the aquifer. Is our current water source, the Edwards Aquifer, sufficiently protected, and do you have any ideas for developing other water sources for the city?
Thank you. I'm not sure if we can ever sufficiently protect the aquifer. I think we're doing a pretty good job. The Unified Development Code calls for certain restrictions. I think the area that needs to be beefed up is the prohibited substances over the aquifer. SAWS has a list, but it's very general, and it needs to be beefed up in that respect. I also think that we ought to include incentives for builders in terms of using more environmentally friendly building materials and those kind of things, and I think that would help with the aquifer and the protection of it. Thank you.
Thanks. I guess we should just stay seated. Dr. Stribling is going to go over for a while. Well, you know, I think that our aquifer, a lot of people have this misnomer that we don't have enough water. There's plenty of water in the aquifer. It's just a matter of, is it adequately protected? And by this, I'm not talking about all these environmental protections. It's a sensitive situation where if you go out and find one of these fissure cracks, you drop a pebble in it, listen for a while, you can actually hear it hit. So I agree with Dr. Stribling, you put all the restrictions in place, but if we look at the Helotes mulch fire, it's pretty clear that disaster can happen anyway. So we need to protect ourselves by getting a backup source. There's no backup right now. We need to look at getting a backup, not for volumetric purposes, but just for safety reasons.
You know, I don't think we're doing enough right now to protect the Edwards Aquifer. You know, we know that in Category 1 properties, for example, there's no impervious cover limits. And unfortunately, many of those properties are grandfathered. We need to do more to work with state law to work on the impervious cover limits. I support the least amount of impervious cover that you can possibly have to protect the Edwards Aquifer. I also believe that we need to look into water conservation, and we need to work with Bear Met and other water districts to do more for our water source.
Of course, we need to protect the aquifer, and right now we have regulations that are very lax, and we need to make sure that we do have regulations that are enforced. And right now the regulations that are in place are, what is the developer going to do after the aquifer gets contaminated? We need to have regulations to prevent it from getting contaminated, and we need to prohibit any kind of cargo with hazardous materials over the aquifer. And of course, we need to look for other water sources as well. Thank you.
Safeguarding our water is big on my list. There's a lot of development in the older part of the district, just below 1604 off the IH-10 corridor that's already over the aquifer recharge zone. But as you go out north, the new development, I want to start working with developers to make sure there's less impervious cover, to make sure we're growing in a responsible fashion. When you talk about working with state law, there are several bills up there right now in regards to the mulch fire over here to safeguard our water. And so again, I want to work strong with our Bexar County delegation to make sure we're coming up with some creative legislative pieces to safeguard our water. And I'm confident we can do that. I'm confident I can do it.
Yeah.
The next question is, you've been hearing a lot in the paper about Bear Met and San Antonio water system. What are your thoughts about the county taking over Bear Met and moving it over to SAWS?
Yeah, I think basically what's happened there is they're bankrupt, okay? If you read through all the headlines, that's the bottom line, they're bankrupt. But because of the way that the laws exist, you have to do something about it, okay? And so the question is, who do we give it over to? Well, I think that if we give it over to the county judges, which is the current plan, they can start working with SAWS in kind of a partnership, which really makes sense. If you go out, not so much in District 8, but if you go out to District 9 and talk to some of our neighbors over there, they can't turn on the water and get pressure. One of the new schools, middle schools that was built there, failed their fire test because there wasn't enough pressure that Bear Met could deliver to that school. So in working with those folks, I think that we can definitely improve that situation. Is it good for San Antonio? At the end of the day, I think it really is, because we're really one system to begin with. We're pumping water back and forth and sharing it anyways. Having it under one control mechanism makes a lot of sense, because instead of having two top bosses trying to figure out what's going on, you eliminate it to one. And anytime you can consolidate government and make it smaller, I think that's a benefit. I think that's what we're seeing here, and it really probably will be a better situation for San Antonio.
Well, I absolutely support the county taking over Bear Met. I think that They have a situation right now that is not fixable, and the county needs to step in to fix it for the citizens and to fix it for the water supply. It's a very serious issue. I have very many friends who actually have Baramet water, and many of whom don't drink the water out of their own tap. It's a serious issue. The county wants to fix it and can do something about it, and absolutely should.
Well, I think they should definitely merge together and pull their resources together and just do work together for the best for San Antonio. Right now, politics is getting in the way of that, but it would be the best thing for San Antonio.
I think it's a good move by the county. I think Baramet's had its problems, we all know that. I think Sauls would be much better at protecting our water quality, looking at alternative water resources, capturing storm runoff like today. A lot of water came down today. I think we could do some creative things. I think the county will be able to make sure the transition is smooth, and we'll be able to make sure that as a community we're taken care of by Sauls. And certainly Sauls is being proactive in regards to some of their water reuse programs, and I'm definitely an advocate for that. So I am for the consolidation.
Telling you a little bit of
Thank you. Obviously, there's been a lot of problems with Baramet, and I think one of the issues is whether or not it should be combined with Sauls. It seems like a reasonable solution to the problem. I think in a lot of cases, if we consolidate, it does help, as long as that consolidation includes efficiency in addressing the problems that Baramet has had for such a long time. But anytime you can consolidate, especially under an issue such as water, because water is really the liquid gold. And I think if we can get more consolidation and get more efficiency, that's the best thing.
The next question is, what ideas do you have for adding green spaces and parks in the District 8 area?
You know, one of the most exciting news about this bond is the acquisition of Local Park. And I think the next council person is going to have to make sure that the park is very well developed. One of the things that we're lacking in District 8 are pocket parks. And I think that we need to hold developers accountable to making sure that when land is developed, that we have set aside lands for pocket parks.
I'm very excited about the acquisition of the new park for this bond election, but we also need to make sure that developers add bike routes and nature trails. I've seen this happen in Houston. I was out with my son looking for a home, and there were very nice subdivisions with bike routes and nature trails, and that's what we need to start doing here in San Antonio.
I'm a big proponent of the Volkner Park. I think that's going to be a great asset for our city, not only for our city, but for District 8, right there on the fringe of District 8 and District 9. I really look at balanced growth, smart growth in the older part of the district. In the dead zones that I've seen, I think we can work really hard to making sure that developers or business owners, maybe we can take care of some of these dead zones and make parks out of them for our high school students and for our kids and families to enjoy. I've been speaking with students out there, and they said if we had parks, some things to do, we wouldn't be out doing graffiti or other things. And so it's balanced growth, more open space, more green belt.
Yeah, I agree. I think when we meet with developers at the beginning of a project, we should plan for green space, because it's hard to backtrack and get green space after a development is already designed and planned and built. I also think we ought to include incentives in our Unified Development Code. And also, you know, we talk about tax abatements. There's not a lot of incentive for tax abatements for developers to develop green space, and I think that's something we ought to look at as we go forward to get more green space in San Antonio.
I think everyone agrees we'd love more parks, right? The question is, how can you get it done? And I think Dr. Stribling mentioned it right there. There has to be an incentive for the developer to do it. As much as we'd like to believe that altruism, people are going to just start donating tracts of land to the city, which does happen in some cases, it's really not practical. If we want to affect that change, we have to go on and say that we're dedicated to using funds to purchase this property. Now, we can either buy it outright, or, as he said, we can incentivize the developers. As you're developing this particular acreage, you have to set aside so much for land. And if you look over to College Station, home of A&M, you'll find that they did just that. And there's a ton of parks there because of it. Something San Antonio could learn from our neighbors.